movement. "But flak," said one. "D'ye mean flak?" said another. "There's no time to lose," said Klosser, and shouted "Flak!" as he had led the way. The whole force advanced towards the rat holes, the man who had run away a little to the rear. They went forward through the rank, exaggerated weeds, and skirted the body of the second dead rat. They were extended in a bunchy line, each man with his gun pointing forward, and they peered about them in the clear moonlight for some crumpled, ominous shape, some crouching form. They found the gun of the man who had run away very speedily. "Flak!" cried Kosser. "Flak!" "He ran past the nettles and fell down," volunteered the man who ran away. "Where?" "Round about there." "Where did he fall?" He hesitated, and led them athwart the long black shadows for a space, and turned judicially. "About here, I think." "Well, he's not here now." "But his gun—" "Confound it!" swore Kasser. "Where's everything got to?" He strode a step towards the black shadows on the hillside that masked the holes and stood staring. Then he swore again. "If they have dragged him in—" So they hung, for a space, tossing each other the fragments of thoughts. Bensington's glasses flashed like diamonds as he looked from one to the other. The men's faces changed from cold clearness to a mysterious obscurity as they turned them to or from the moon. Every one spoke, no one completed a sentence. Then abruptly Cossard chose his line. He flapped his limbs this way and that and expelled orders in pellets. It was obvious he wanted lamps. Every one except Cossar was moving towards the hole. "You're going into the holes?" asked Redwood. "Obviously," said Cossar. He made it clear once more that the lamps of the cart and trolley were to be got and brought to him. Bensington, grasping this, started off along the path by the well. He glanced over his shoulder and saw Cossar's gigantic figure standing out as if he were regarding the holes pensively. At the sight Bensington halted for a moment and half turned. They were all leaving Cossar. Cossar was able to take care of himself, of course. Suddenly Bensington saw something that made him shout a windless "Hi!" In a second 3 rats had projected themselves from the dark tangle of the creeper towards Cossar. For 3 seconds Cossar stood, unaware of them, and then he had become the most active thing in the world. He didn't fire his gun. Apparently he had no time to aim, or to think of aiming. He ducked a leaping rat Bensington saw, and then smashed at the back of its head with the butt of his gun. The monster gave one leap and fell over itself. Cossar's form went right down out of sight among the reedy grass, and then he rose again, running towards another of the rats, and whirling his gun overhead. A faint shout came to Bensington's ears, and then he perceived the remaining 2 rats bolting divergently, and Cossar in pursuit towards the holes. The whole thing was an affair of misty shadows. All 3 fighting monsters were exaggerated and made unreal by the delusive clearness of the light. At moments Cossar was colossal, at moments invisible. The rats flashed athwart the eye in sudden unexpected leaps, or ran with a movement of the feet so swift they seemed to run on wheels. It was all over in half a minute. No one saw it but Bensington. He could hear the others behind him still receding towards the house. He shouted something inarticulate, and then ran back towards Cossar, while the rats vanished. He came up to him outside the holes. In the moonlight the distribution of shadows that constituted Cossar's visage intimated calm. "Hullo," said Cossar. "Back already? Where's the lamps?" "They're all back now in their holes. One I broke the neck of as it ran past me. See? There!" And he pointed a gaunt finger. Bensington was too astonished for conversation. The lamps seemed an interminable time in coming. At last they appeared, first one unwinking luminous eye, preceded by a swaying yellow glare, and then, winking now and then shining out again, 2 others. About them came little figures with little voices, and then enormous shadows. This group made, as it were, a spot of inflammation upon the gigantic dreamland of moonshine. "Flak," said the voices. "Flak!" An illuminating sentence floated up. "Locked himself in the attic." Cossar was continually more wonderful. He produced great handfuls of cotton wool and stuffed them in his ears. Bensington wondered why. Then he loaded his gun with a quarter charge of powder. Who else could have thought of that? Wonderland culminated with the disappearance of Cossar's twin realms of boot sole upon the central hole. Cossar was on all fours with 2 guns, one trailing on each side from a string under his chin, and his most trusted assistant, a little dark man with a grave face, was to go in stooping behind him, holding a lantern over his head. Everything had been made as sane and obvious and proper as a lunatic's dream. The wool, it seems, was on account of the concussion of the rifle. The man had some too, obviously. So long as the rats turned tail on Cossar, no harm could come to him, and directly they headed for him he would see their eyes and fire between them. Since they would have to come down the cylinder of the hole, Cossar could hardly fail to hit them. It was, Cossar insisted, the obvious method, a little tedious perhaps, but absolutely certain. As the assistant stooped to enter, Bensington saw that the end of a ball of twine had been tied to the tail of his coat. By this he was to draw in the rope if it should be needed to drag out the bodies of the rats. Bensington perceived that the object he held in his hand was Cossar's silk hat. How had it got there? It would be something to remember him by, anyhow. At each of the adjacent holes stood a little group with a lantern on the ground shining up the hole, and with one man kneeling and aiming at the round void before him, waiting for anything that might emerge. There was an interminable suspense. Then they heard Coster's first shot, like an explosion in a mine. Everyone's nerves and muscles tightened at that, and bang, 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 the rats had tried to bolt, and 2 more were dead. Then the man who held the ball of twine reported it twitching. "He's killed one in here," said Benson, "and he wants the rope." He watched the rope creep into the hole, and it seemed as though it had become animated by a serpentine intelligence, for the darkness made the twine invisible. At last it stopped crawling, and there was a long pause. Then what seemed to Benson the queerest monster of all crept slowly from the hole, and resolved itself into the little engineer emerging backwards. After him, and ploughing deep furrows, Coster's boots thrust out, and then came his lantern-illuminated back. Only 1 rat was left alive now, and this poor doomed wretch cowered in the innermost recesses until Coster and the lantern went in again and slew it, and finally Coster, that human ferret, went through all the runs to make sure. "We got 'un," he said to his nearly awe-stricken company at last, "and if it hadn't been a mud-headed mucker I should have stripped to the waist, obviously. Feel my sleeves, Benson. I'm wet through with perspiration. Jolly odd to think of everything. Only a half-way up of whiskey can save me from a cold." 7. There were moments during that wonderful night when it seemed to Benson that he was planned by nature for a life of fantastic adventure. This was particularly the case for an hour or so after he had taken a stiff whiskey. "Shan't go back to Sloane Street," he confided to the tall, fair, dirty engineer. "You won't, eh? No fear," said Benson, nodding darkly. The exertion of dragging the 7 dead rats to the funeral pyre by the nettle grove left him bathed in perspiration, and Coster pointed out the obvious physical reaction of whiskey to save him from the otherwise inevitable chill. There was a sort of brigand's supper in the old bricked kitchen, with a row of dead rats lying in the moonlight against the hen runs outside, and after 30 minutes or so of rest, Coster roused them all to the labours they were still to do. Obviously, as he said, they had to wipe the place out. No litter, no scandal, see? He stirred them up the idea of making destruction complete. They smashed and splintered every fragment of wood in the house. They built trails of chopped wood wherever big vegetation was springing. They made a pyre for the rat bodies and soaked them in paraffin. Benson worked like a conscientious navvy. He had a sort of climax of exhilaration and energy towards 2 o'clock, when in the work of destruction he wielded an axe the bravest fled in his neighbourhood. Afterwards he was a little sobered by the temporary loss of his spectacles, which were found for him at last in his side coat pocket. Men went to and fro about him, grimy, energetic men. Coster moved amongst them like a god. Benson drank that delight of human fellowship that comes to happy armies, to sturdy expeditions, never to those who live the life of the sober citizen in the cities. After Coster had taken his axe away and set him to carry wood, he went to and fro, saying they were all good fellows. He kept on, long after he was aware of fatigue. At last all was ready, and the broaching of the paraffin began. The moon, robbed now of all its meagre night retinue of stars, shone high above the dawn. "Burn everything," said Coster, going to and fro. "Burn the ground, and make a clean sweep of it, see?" Benson became aware of him, looking now very gaunt and horrible in the pale beginnings of the daylight, hurrying past with his lower jaw projected, and flaring a torch of touchwood in his hand. "Come away," said someone, pulling Benson's arm. The still dawn, no birds were singing there, was suddenly full of a tumultuous crackling. A little dull red flame ran about the base of the pyre, tinged to blue upon the ground, and set out to clamber, leaf by leaf, up the stem of a giant nettle. A singing sound mingled with the crackling. They snatched their guns from the corner of the Skinners' living room, and then everyone was running. Coster came after them with heavy strides. Then they were standing, looking back at the experimental farm. It was boiling up. The smoke and flames poured out like a crowd in a panic, from doors and windows, and from 1,000 cracks and crevices in the roof. Trust Coster to build a fire. A great column of smoke, shot with blood-red tongues and darting flashes, rushed up into the sky. It was like some huge giant suddenly standing up, straining upward and abruptly spreading his great arms out across the sky. It cast the night back upon them, utterly hiding and obliterating the incandescence of the sun that rose behind it. All Hickley Brow was soon aware of that stupendous pillar of smoke, and came out upon the crest, in various deshabille, to watch them coming. Behind, like some fantastic fungus, this smoke pillar swayed and fluctuated, up into the sky, making the downs seem low and all other objects petty, and in the foreground, led by Coster, the makers of this mischief followed the path, 8 little black figures, coming wearily, guns shouldered, across the meadow. As Benson looked back there came into his jaded brain and echoed there a familiar formula. What was it? "You have lit to-day, you have lit to-day." Then he remembered Latimer's words. "We have lit this day such a candle in England as no man may ever put out again." What a man Coster was, to be sure! He admired his back view for a space, and was proud to have held that hat. Proud, although he was an eminent investigator and Coster only engaged in applied science. Suddenly he felt shivering and yawning enormously, and wishing he was warmly tucked away in bed in his little flat that looked out upon Sloane Street. It didn't do even to think of Cousin Jane. His legs became cotton strands, his feet lead. He wondered if any one